I want you to imagine, just for a second, the most terrifying place on Earth.
Oh, boy.
You are standing in a flooded, muddy trench. Bullets are, buzzing through the air overhead like angry wasps. Artillery shells are hitting so close that the ground is literally shaking beneath your boots.
Right, vibrating right up through your jaw.
Exactly. And every single human instinct, like millions of years of biological survival programming, is screaming at you to do one thing, which is hide.
Yeah, bury your face in the dirt and just pray you make it to tomorrow.
But instead of doing that, you stand up, you step out of the cover, and you raise a tiny camera to your eye.
It is the absolute definition of defying human nature.
It really is.
Most of us cannot even fathom actively seeking out that level of physical danger, let alone trying to focus a lens while doing it.
Right, because to do this job, a person has to completely rebel against their own internal software. You're fighting your brain's most primal urge to flee, all so you can take one deliberate step closer to death.
Yeah.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into a stack of really fascinating sources. We've got an in-depth written retrospective from SanalSergi.com and the incredible historical context from its companion Turkish audio documentary.
Some really amazing material in there.
Truly. And our mission today is to figure out how one man rewired his brain to walk directly into the line of fire. We are talking about Robert Capa, the man who essentially invented the modern concept of the war photographer.
And he lived by a motto that has become absolutely legendary. He'd say, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough.
Which is just chilling. But okay, to understand how someone arrives at that extreme philosophy, we have to look at what they were running from, right?
Exactly. The story doesn't actually start on a battlefield. It starts in Budapest in 1913.
Okay.
And crucially, he wasn't born as Robert Capa. His real name was Endre Friedmann.
Endre Friedmann.
Right. He was born into a Jewish-Hungarian family during a window of time when the political climate across Central Europe was, well, it was rapidly deteriorating.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
Right. By the time he was a teenager in 1930, the rising tide of anti-Semitism and political oppression made it violently clear to young Endre that he had to run. So he fled his home and made his way to Berlin.
And Berlin in the early 1930s was this massive, chaotic cultural hub. But what I find so interesting is how he actually enters the world of photography.
Yeah, it's not what you'd expect.
Right. He doesn't just buy a camera and start taking portraits in a park.
Far from it. He started at the absolute bottom, working as a darkroom assistant at a Berlin photo agency.
Wow.
Because back then, photography was heavy manual labor. It was complex chemistry.
Yeah.
He was in the pitch black, mixing volatile chemical baths, managing the physical mechanics of film development.
So he's learning how light reacts to chemical emulsions.
Exactly. He mastered the painstaking invisible science of bringing an image to life long before he ever really looked through a viewfinder to compose a shot.
You learn the chemistry before the composition. That gives you such a fundamental structural understanding of the medium.
It really does.
And that technical foundation sets him up for his first real breakthrough, right? In 1932.
Yeah, 1932. He was sent to Copenhagen, where Leon Trotsky, who had been exiled from the Soviet Union, was giving a speech.
And security for Trotsky was incredibly tight.
Oh, incredibly tight. But Endre managed to slip in.
Yep.
And he captured this phenomenally dynamic shot of Trotsky mid-speech.
I've seen it. The lighting is so dramatic.
It is. Trotsky's hand is raised, and you can just feel the fiery energy of the moment. It was a massive success. It was his first major publication.
But then history gets in the way.
Yeah, the victory was entirely overshadowed.
Mm-hmm.
Because in 1933, the Nazis took power in Germany.
So the survival software kicks in again, the ground is shrinking beneath his feet, and he has to run.
He had no choice. The timeline gave him no choice at all. He fled to Paris, joining this massive wave of refugees.
Right.
But Paris in the 1930s was incredibly unforgiving if you were a broke Eastern European immigrant. The bureaucracy was a total nightmare, and the journalism industry itself was deeply prejudiced.
They just wouldn't hire him.
No. Editors simply were not buying photographs from a young, unknown Hungarian refugee with a thick accent.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because this brings us to one of my absolute favorite parts of his story.
The hustle.
Yes, because Endre doesn't just give up. He and his friends look at this prejudice system and decide to hack it.
They completely invent a fictional persona.
Exactly. They create Robert Capa, this glamorous, highly successful, mysterious American photographer.
The pitch was that Capa was simply too rich and too important to meet with Parisian editors himself.
It's so bold.
The mechanics of the hustle were brilliant, honestly. Endre would go out and shoot the photographs. His partner would dress up in her absolute finest clothes, march into the editorial offices, and present the work as the exclusive property of the great American Robert Capa.
And it worked?
Oh, it worked perfectly.
Yeah.
Because of the perceived prestige, they were able to sell the exact same photos for 3 times the going rate.
It is the ultimate 1930s startup strategy. It's a complete corporate rebranding. They recognized that the market didn't value the product, it valued the packaging.
Yeah. But if we peel back the layers on that, it was much more than clever marketing. It was a literal survival shield.
How do you mean?
Well, in a Europe that was rapidly and, violently categorizing people based on their ethnic and national origins, presenting as a wealthy American offered a layer of bureaucratic armor.
Ah, great.
It gave Endre Friedmann a way to exist and work in a society that wanted to erase him.
Wow. The incredible irony here, though, is that this fake, glamorous American persona successfully got him paid in the safe, comfortable cafes of Paris.
Yes.
But the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in 1936 completely changed the game. The danger stopped being bureaucratic and became lethal.
Absolutely. The Spanish Civil War pulled him right out of the cafes and straight into the trenches. And he didn't go alone.
Right, his partner.
The partner who helped him invent the Capa persona was a woman named Gerda Poveril. She was another refugee who had fled to Paris.
And she rebranded herself too, right?
She did. She rebranded herself as Gerda Toro. They became partners, both professionally and romantically, and together they completely dismantled the old rules of war photography.
Wait, let's look at those old rules for a second. Because before Capa and Taro, if you looked at a newspaper in the 1910s or 1920s, war photography was incredibly static.
It had to be, purely because of the technology. Earlier war photographers were dragging around massive wooden tripods and huge cameras that used fragile glass plates instead of modern film.
Oh, I can't even imagine running with that.
You couldn't, because the equipment was so heavy and the exposure times were so slow, you couldn't photograph actual combat. You had to set up miles behind the front lines and take posed pictures of generals looking sternly at maps.
Or troops standing perfectly still in a camp.
Exactly. War looked like a diorama.
So what changes? How do they suddenly get into the action?
They dropped the heavy gear and adopted the 35mm Leica camera. The Leica was revolutionary because it used roll film technology adapted from the cinema industry. It was a tiny metal block that fit right in your hand.
So no more glass plates.
Right, you didn't have to swap out a fragile glass plate after every single shot. You could wind the film, duck under fire, run across a trench, and shoot 36 frames in rapid succession.
It allowed the photographer to move at the actual speed of war.
Exactly. And that mobility leads directly to 1936, and arguably one of the most famous and debated photographs in human history, which is the falling soldier.
Oh man, that image.
It is an image that burns itself into your memory. You are looking at a Republican militiaman in a white shirt, alone on a hillside, and he is falling violently backward.
You are seeing the exact fraction of a second that a bullet strikes him.
Yes. His arms are flung wide out to the sides and his rifle is suspended in midair, just slipping from his fingers. It captures the precise, invisible transition between life and death.
It's haunting.
But almost immediately, and for decades afterward, critics questioned its authenticity. Was it too perfectly timed? Was it physically possible for a 1930s shutter speed to freeze that motion? Some argued it must have been staged during a training exercise.
You know, I am going to push back on that whole debate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because honestly, whether it was a staged exercise or a live bullet, does it actually matter to the legacy of the image?
It's a fair point.
Think about the cultural impact. For centuries, war was painted as this noble, glorious chess game where brave men charged over hills with flags. The falling soldier shattered that false romance.
It really did.
It stripped away the glory and showed the world that war is just a brutal, mechanical reality, where a living, breathing human being is simply erased in a split second. It fundamentally changed the psychology of how the public viewed conflict.
I agree completely. It established the visual vocabulary for modern conflict. You're no longer looking at the chessboard, you're looking at the pawn being destroyed. But the reality of that proximity caught up to them in the most devastating way imaginable. In 1937, during the absolute chaos of the Battle of Brunette, Gerda was crushed by a retreating tank.
Oh, God.
She became one of the first female photojournalists in history to die on the front lines.
See, this is the pivot point in the story where I struggle to wrap my head around his choices.
How so?
The literal machine of war crushes the woman he loves. Basic human psychology, all that survival software we talked about earlier, would scream at you to run as far away from that machine as possible.
Right.
Why didn't this horrific, intimate loss make him put the camera down forever?
It is a profound psychological question. And what we see is that instead of retreating, Capa leaned in even closer.
He went back.
He did. Modern psychology might classify it as a severe form of survivor's guilt. He took the unimaginable grief of losing Taro and forged it into a lifelong obsessive mission.
Like he had to prove something.
Right. His logic seemed to be, if she died trying to expose the brutality of the war machine, he was going to dedicate every breathing moment to ensuring that machine had nowhere to hide. Her death seemed to strip away his fear, leaving behind an almost fatalistic drive to document the truth.
A drive that drags him directly into the epicenter of the greatest global conflagration in history, World War II.
Throughout the Second World War, Capa was everywhere. But he didn't just photograph the massive explosions or the tanks. He consistently looked for the human element dwarfed by the destruction.
Give me an example of that.
Well, a perfect example is a photo he took in Sicily in 1943. You have this towering, heavily armed American soldier, a part of this massive global military operation, crouching down in the dirt.
What's he doing?
He's getting directions from a tiny, elderly Sicilian peasant who's leaning on a wooden cane.
Oh, wow. It's a striking contrast. It forces you to remember that underneath the geopolitics, wars are fought in people's backyards. But if we want to talk about the terrifying scale of the machine, nothing in history compares to June 6, 1944, D-Day. Omaha Beach.
No, nothing compares to that. And when the invasion began, Capa didn't photograph it safely from the deck of a Navy destroyer.
Of course not.
He waded into the freezing, choppy waters of the English Channel alongside the very first wave of American infantry.
Unbelievable.
The air is thick with the smell of cordite and deafening German machine gun fire. Artillery shells are blasting geysers of water into the air. And Capa is right there, waist deep in the surf, hiding behind steel anti-tank traps, desperately trying to load a fresh roll of 35mm film into his camera.
Big bullets flying everywhere.
With his hands shaking violently from the cold and the sheer adrenaline, and he manages to shoot 106 frames of the invasion.
He shot 106 frames on the beach.
Yeah.
Why do we only ever see a tiny handful of them in the history books?
Because of what happened next. Capa gets the film back to London to be rushed into print for Life magazine. The film is handed off to a darkroom assistant. Now, to understand the disaster, you have to know that camera film is essentially a strip of plastic coated with a gelatinous, light-sensitive chemical layer called an emulsion.
Right, and that emulsion holds the physical image.
Exactly. The assistant in London is so stressed, so panicked about making the magazine's strict publication deadline, that he turns the heat in the drying cabinet up way too high to dry the film faster.
Oh, no.
The heat literally melts the chemical emulsion right off the plastic.
Are you kidding me?
Out of 106 historically priceless frames, only about 11 survive the darkroom.
That is the ultimate technical failure. But, here is where I think the story gets really incredible.
Yeah.
If you look at those 11 surviving photos, and I highly recommend pulling up the full article on SanalSergi.com to look at them while you listen, they are a mess.
They are.
They are blurry. They are incredibly grainy. Capa even cheekily titled his own memoir later on, Slightly Out of Focus. But I would argue that a crisp, perfect, high-definition image wouldn't have actually captured the reality of D-Day.
That's a great point.
That blurry, melted, streaky chaos perfectly translates the sheer panic, the movement, and the aesthetic terror of being trapped on that beach. The technical disaster actually created a masterpiece.
The flaw absolutely became the message. The visual instability of the melting emulsion perfectly mirrored the physical and psychological instability of the moment.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And as Capa followed the Allied advance, he continued to focus heavily on that psychological toll. The physical combat was horrific, but the aftermath was often deeply unsettling.
The aftermath photos are incredibly heavy. You look at them and you see how war rots a society from the inside out.
Take his 1944 photograph, The Shaved Woman of Chartres, taken right after the liberation of France.
Right.
You see a French woman accused of collaborating with the German occupiers. Her head has been forcibly shaved by the locals, and she is being paraded through the streets holding her infant baby.
Just terrible.
The civilian crowd surrounding her just vibrating with this ugly, vindictive energy. Or look at the photo he took right at the bitter end of the war in 1945 in Leipzig.
The soldier in the apartment?
Yes, an American soldier lying dead in a pool of blood on the floor of a civilian living room. He was shot by a sniper just days before the German surrender.
It's so senseless.
It is a young life ending abruptly on a nice rug for a war that was essentially already over. Those specific haunting images really force you to carry the weight of what he witnessed.
And surviving the deadliest conflict in human history triggers a massive realization for Capa. He comes out of World War II and looks at his career. He has risked his life 100 times, he's watched friends die, and he has captured the ultimate defining truths of the 20th century.
Yes.
But under the business model of the 1940s, he doesn't actually own a single one of those truths. The magazines do.
Right. This is a systemic issue in early photojournalism. The magazines physically possessed the negatives. This frustration led Capa, along with Henri Cartier-Bresson, David Seymour, George Roger, and William Van de Wert, to completely upend the industry in 1947 by founding Magnum Photos.
Magnum.
Because before Magnum, photojournalists were essentially treated like plumbers.
Okay, break that down for me. How is a war photographer like a plumber?
Think about the legal concept of work for hire. If you hire a plumber to install a sink in your house, you pay them for their labor. But the plumber doesn't own the sink once they leave, and they certainly don't own the water that flows out of it.
Right, makes sense.
The magazines treated photographers the exact same way. They said, we paid for your flight to Europe and we paid for your time. Therefore, we own the physical film negative forever.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because the old system, for all its glaring flaws, was secure. The magazines gave you the assignments, they covered your massive travel expenses, and they guaranteed a paycheck. Why would Capa and his friends risk total financial ruin to start an independent co-op? Wasn't it safer to just be a well-paid plumber?
What's fascinating here is that Magnum wasn't built for financial greed. It was built for ethical control.
Ethical control.
Exactly. Imagine you take a nuanced, heartbreaking photo of a suffering civilian. Under the old system, the magazine owns that negative. They can take scissors to it, crop out the context, write a new caption, and publish it as heroic, pro-war propaganda.
Oh, wow.
If you don't own the copyright, you are no longer a journalist. You're simply a tool. Magnum allowed photographers to retain their own copyrights. It was a mechanism to protect the integrity of the image from editors who wanted to twist reality.
It's a massive paradigm shift. They took back the power of the narrative. So armed with this new freedom through Magnum, Capa decides he is finally done with the destruction. He wants to document the birth of new societies instead of the death of old ones.
He certainly tried. In 1948, he traveled to the Middle East to document the complex birth of the State of Israel.
And what did he focus on?
Instead of focusing on combat, he focused on the massive waves of refugees arriving by ship, the sprawling tent cities, the sheer, exhausting human effort of building a nation from scratch. And he maintained a strict journalistic neutrality.
Even during the fighting?
Yes. During the Altalena incident, which was a violent political clash between rival factions within Israel, Capa was right there in the crossfire, photographing the internal chaos without ever taking a side. He just observed the painful reality of the moment.
But no matter how hard he tried to pivot, the magnetic pull of the front line was just too strong, wasn't it?
It was an addition he couldn't shake. He frequently told people he was tired of war, that he wanted to photograph peace. But when Life magazine called in 1954 with an assignment to cover the First Indochina War, he accepted.
And that leads to the end.
Yes. On May 25th, 1954, he was embedded with a French military convoy moving near Nam Dinh. The convoy paused on the road. Capa, who was constantly driven by that lifelong urge to find a better angle, stepped away from the safety of the vehicles and climbed up a small, grassy embankment.
To get closer.
He stepped on a hidden landmine. The blast severely injured him, and he died shortly after. He was only 40 years old.
Just 40.
When they recovered his camera, they found a final, haunting frame still inside a French soldier, advancing down the dirt road, shot from behind, captured just moments before the explosion ended Capa's life.
So, What does this all mean? When I look at the entirety of his life, I can't help but see this incredibly tragic irony.
How so?
His golden rule, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough, was exactly the mechanism of his death. By crossing that boundary, by refusing to stay a safe observer and insisting on being a participant, he inevitably became a victim of the very violence he spent his entire life exposing.
It is the ultimate paradox of the war correspondent. You must get close to the fire to show people the flames, but get too close and you burn.
Right.
While Capa's physical life ended in that field in Indochina, his visual philosophy became the permanent, unshakable blueprint for modern photojournalism. His brother, Cornel Capa, founded the International Center of Photography in New York specifically to preserve that legacy.
That's amazing.
And today, the highest honor in the field, the Robert Capa Gold Medal, is awarded to photojournalists who demonstrate the kind of exceptional courage and enterprise that he defined.
It's a monumental legacy. But looking at how Capa worked, it makes me seriously wonder about where we are today with how we consume images of conflict.
It's a critical question, especially considering we live in an era that Capa couldn't have even conceptualized.
Yeah, we are completely saturated with AI deepfakes that can generate a hyper-realistic, emotionally manipulative war zone from a text prompt in 3 seconds.
And the nature of war itself has changed. We conduct drone strikes via joystick from thousands of miles away, sitting in air-conditioned rooms on entirely different continents.
Distance is absolute.
Exactly. The physical proximity to danger, the very thing Capa based his entire philosophy on, has been completely erased for the people pulling the trigger.
So if Robert Capa were alive today, how would he redefine getting close enough when the very concept of visual truth is under attack and the battlefield itself has become invisible?
Right. How do you photograph the truth when the truth is a line of code?
That is exactly the kind of question that will keep me staring at the ceiling tonight. The physical trench might have moved, and the cameras might be digital now, but the fundamental danger of hiding from the truth remains exactly the same. Robert Capa didn't just photograph war, he photographed the human experience inside history.
He stared into the worst parts of humanity and dared us to look at it without blinking.
If you want to see the world through his lens and truly understand what it means to be close enough, I warmly invite you to explore the original photographs and read the full article on SanalSergi.com. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll catch you next time.